There are oases of comfort throughout the world. However, the Earth offers few pleasures for most of its inhabitants. For his 10,000 years of grubbing a living off the planet, man has found life for the most part to be cruel. Disenchantment abounds, fatigue, hunger, and cold. However, nature, almost as an afterthought, softened her terms. She sprinkled the harsh earth with a variety of plants, each offering momentary escape, a passport from reality. Their protective effects have been known since the time of the ancients. In virtually any of the hot countries of the world, where the soil is fertile, and farmers still employ the oldest methods of cultivation, flourishes a plant scientifically known as Papaver somniferum, more commonly known as the opium poppy. Its pods contain a milky fluid that for centuries provided the raw material for one of the most demoralizing and dissipating vices in the world. Known as far back as 4000 BC, use of opium historically centered on the Mediterranean. Eventually, Arab and Persian traders introduced the mystic wonders of the poppy to all the communities with whom they bartered. By the 16th century, India was cultivating it. In the 17th century, China discovered the euphoric delights that came from smoking it. Opium dens, set back in sinister alleys, flourished throughout the Far East. Even though millions of Chinese were thrust into moral and physical degradation, the use of opium was actually romanticized in literature by Edgar Allan Poe, Thomas de Quincey, and Samuel Taylor Coleridge, all brilliant writers, and each an opium taker. Its use had become such a problem in China that the emperor issued edict after edict forbidding its import. In spite of this, in the 1800s, British and American sea captains bought shiploads of opium at the great auctions in Calcutta and traded them illicitly at Chinese seaports. Then the emperor cracked down. In 1838, in one haul, he confiscated $6 million worth of opium from the British ships at Canton. England retaliated with a naval squadron, and the notorious opium wars were on. Although she would be censured in the eyes of the world, the war enabled Britain to force a treaty, giving her the greatest port in the Far East, Hong Kong. As well as unrestricted opium trade for her enterprising sea captains. Then, in the 19th century, a German refinement. Through a relatively simple chemical process, raw opium was transformed into morphine base. In 1898, another refinement from Germany. From morphine base came the derivative, heroin. It took at least 60 centuries to bring poppy's euphoric effects from the cradle of civilization all the way to the opium pipes in Canton. But within only a few decades, modern science was able to funnel the poppy's impact straight into the central nervous system in one cool blast. Today, thousands of prisons and hospitals all over the world are crowded with patients who have experimented with the poppy's final derivative and who have become addicted to it. Its astronomical profits on the street corners of the Ginza in Tokyo, the Piccadilly Circus in London, and the Great White Way in New York have made it the world's #1 illicit commodity. A deck of heroin sold on a metropolitan sidewalk is the final transaction in a long series of closely guarded, clandestine operations. Charles Siragusa, former Deputy Commissioner of Narcotics, has first-hand knowledge of all of them.
The illicit narcotic traffic, the route of it is not quite as complex as it would appear. Turkey still remains as the principal source of the raw material, which is opium. The opium is then processed into morphine base, sometimes in Turkey, other times in Syria and Beirut and Lebanon. The French now have control of the Lebanese market. They've been associated with them in all sorts of illicit international rackets for many years. The Lebanese will sell the morphine base to the French. These French Corsicans, who have had traditional ties with them for many, many years, arrange for the smuggling of the morphine base into France. Marseille is the capital of the Corsican underworld for all of France.
Once in Marseille, chemists take over, converting morphine base into heroin. This is the most difficult phase of the entire industry. Skilled chemists are not easy to find. A Turkish farmer sells 10 kilos of raw opium, or about 22 pounds, for $350 on the black market. Through conversion, it is reduced to 1 kilo of heroin, now worth $3,500.
Now they've got to sell the heroin. The ones with the customers in the United States are the mafia hoods, mostly in New York City, Chicago, the West Coast.
Heroin, in its relatively pure form, enters the United States in a variety of ways. The port of New York is by far the most common route and is the main target for Narcotic Bureau investigators working hand in hand with customs inspectors. An estimated 2 tons of pure heroin is annually smuggled into the States, and it's considered a good year when the inspectors manage to intercept 100 pounds of it. Smuggling is a fine art, and the Corsicans are considered to be the finest practitioners in the world. Today, the automobile is a favorite hiding place, and there is hardly a part of the chassis or body that is not, at one time or another, offered concealment for big heroin shipments. The second major port of entry into the United States is the Mexican border. This is the main entrance for illicit marijuana shipments, but a good supply of heroin slips through as well.
We are in our vault in which all the marijuana and heroin which is seized is stored until the criminal case against the defendants is terminated by federal court action. This contraband is concealed in most ingenious ways in vehicles and on persons. In fact, you can name a place that you feel contraband could be concealed, and I can cite you an instance where we have found it there. Some months ago, we encountered a young fellow entering the United States from Mexico eating an ice cream cone. A search revealed that he had an ounce of heroin concealed in the ice cream cone. In this area, we also have a number of yachts, some 5,000 private yachts based in this area, all of which have the facility or capability of going to Mexican waters. This poses quite a threat, as do the increasing number of private aircraft crossing the international boundaries.
Once the heroin reaches its American distributors, it is blended with milk sugar and is cut at least one more time by the peddler himself. The heroin strength is now only 5%, normal for the retail market. Each packet or deck will sell for $5. Thus, the original 22 pounds of raw opium, sold by a Turkish farmer for $350, is eventually worth on the sidewalks of Manhattan over $410,000, and in a panic, $500,000. This is the focal point of hard drug addiction in the United States. The urban ghettos house nearly 3/4 of the hardcore addicts, with New York's teeming slums far out in front.
The traffic starts in Manhattan. More readily obtainable in Manhattan, especially in the Harlem area, up around Lexington Avenue, from about 97th to around 135th Street, 116th Street, running east to west completely, 125th Street, and so many other spots. Probably take me all day to name them all.
America's known heroin population of over 60,000 collectively shoots nearly 2 tons of opiates a year. More than half live within the tenement shadows of Harlem and the Bronx.
When I first came to East Harlem in 1948, it was primarily a large Italian and Puerto Rican community. For our part, as far as the kids or the adolescents were concerned, it was constant warfare. There were many, many gangs. And it might be said that gangs were the main problem in East Harlem then. There was much bloodshed, and the ironic thing is that the only thing that united Italians and Puerto Ricans together was the use of drugs.
For the ghetto dweller, heroin is a desperate bid for freedom, an escape from the despair of the tenement prison.
After getting married, sort of couldn't meet up with the responsibilities that I had taken on, and sort of felt the need to escape from these. My first marriage, I've been married twice, has only lasted about 4 years, with continuously using drugs. I had 2 children. Right after my first marriage broke up, I was immediately married again. In fact, my first marriage broke up through meeting this other woman. I went along for about 8 months not using drugs, and finally I come back to getting the feelings of, trying to escape again. And I started using drugs 8 months after my second marriage.
I feel that the main problem in the city at the time is environment. I would say that the good majority of the people that go on to heroin go on it as a result of their environment. The people they know, their friends, the ready availability to obtain it, and so forth.
I started to use it. I started to sniff it just to be part of a group. I started to use it while I was in school. And one day I woke up and I was addicted. I woke up and I was very sick, and I didn't know what was bringing it about. But I did find out that as soon as I took some heroin through my nose, I got well. I felt normal.
And once a fellow is on heroin, it may be years before he realizes or wants to admit to himself that he is indeed a junkie and that he is in need of help.
A fellow can start on narcotics, I would say, at any age, really, of course, and within a matter of 3 to 6 months, starting out at about $4 or $6 a day, he can work his way up to a $100 a day habit.
I was using about over $100 a day. Everything I would get was to go through my arms.
The Harrison Act of 1914, strengthened by a series of Treasury Department regulations, is the basic law restricting production and distribution of narcotics. Although the law does not refer to the addict himself, the implicit premise is that addiction is willful indulgence, meriting punishment.
I feel that the people living in the metropolitan area are arrested more frequently and exposed to arrest, and the possibility of being jailed much more than the people in suburban areas, for the simple reason that a good majority of them, the majority of them, come from poverty homes. They don't have, in most cases, money for proper legal aid, although the city will provide them with some.
What about you? You stuff? Let me see what you look like. What are you doing with the needle in your hand then?
Possession alone is sufficient evidence for conviction. Users, anticipating raids, frequently conceal their day's supply in a toy balloon, keeping it in their mouth. If apprehended, they swallow the evidence, knowing that they can retrieve it later.
Are under arrest for unlawful possession of needles and unlawful possession of heroin.
Following World War II, hard drug use, particularly among young people, was on the upswing. Public reaction surged, resulting in more stringent controls, stiffer penalties. The 1956 Narcotic Control Act spelled out the most severe and inflexible set of laws ever put on the federal books. Penalties for possession were only slightly less than those for selling. Probation was possible only on a first offense possession charge. The sentence was 2 to 10 years. Second and third offenses and selling in any quantity, even soft drugs such as marijuana, brought terms up to 40 years with no chance for probation or parole. Selling heroin to a minor could bring a possible death penalty. At the same time the law was taking a harsher look at the addict, popular opinion began to swing back in his favor, recognizing that he was not just a criminal, but a sick person, a pathetic, tortured human being in need of help. The Narcotic Addict Rehabilitation Act of 1966 set forth a new national policy for treatment of addicts. At the core of the policy is the premise that addiction is an illness that should be treated, not a criminal act in itself. For the first time, federal law permitted addicts to apply for treatment instead of being prosecuted. At the Federal Narcotics Hospital in Lexington, Kentucky, bars that had restrained addicts for 33 years were removed, dramatic proof of society's new attitude toward the wretched victims of the opium poppy. It became a major drug abuse research center, administered by the National Institute of Mental Health.
One of the distinctive contributions of the Narcotic Addict Rehabilitation Act of 1966 is the fact that it authorizes us to provide up to as much as 3 years of aftercare supervised by professionals in the community, in which the major emphasis is put on helping the addict to correct whatever inadequacies may have contributed to his addiction in the first place, in order to maximize the likelihood of his adjustment when he returns home.
Throughout the 1960s, many new treatment programs have been launched, in and out of government. Perhaps the most publicized is Synanon, a private organization founded and managed by ex-addicts.
Best thing for people is people, and Synanon provides the environment to bring together peoples from all walks of life. We now have 1,000 people in residence. Well, 4,000 people belong to our Synanon clubs, and they don't live here. People from all walks of life, newsmen, housewives, bricklayers, doctors, lawyers, and all peoples get together within the Synanon environment and talk, communicate to one another.
Some programs take their philosophy right to the center of the action, in the ghettos where drug abuse is rampant. Exodus House. Here, ex-addicts who have begun to remake their lives work closely with narcotic patients, right in the community where the drugs are pushed and used. Daytop Village is typical of the halfway house concept, where the addict is slowly eased back into society, one step at a time. In community extension projects like SPAN, the addict meets with citizens on the outside. He holds frank discussions with them on a group basis. When he returns to his community, he is more than just a law-abiding taxpayer. He is a civic leader, a doer, an activist. The drug problem, in all its complex facets, is a challenge to everyone. We are all potential drug takers, if not heroin, then tranquilizers, stimulants, sleeping pills, and alcohol. Even if we lived in the country's finest communities, our children, at this moment, may be experimenting with marijuana, hallucinogenics, amphetamines. Tight laws and stiff penalties are not the answer. A former narcotics commissioner admitted that the mass flow of hard drugs into the United States could not be stopped even by the collective enforcement of the customs inspectors, all the Treasury agents, the FBI, and the combined strength of all the armed forces. There are essentially two ways to reduce the problem. First, by attacking it on the user's end. Continued research and public enlightenment will increase our understanding of the addict and his compulsion to escape through drugs. Secondly, beyond attacking the problem on the user's end, we must, in a concert of nations, attack it on the other end, the source. The plant itself, whether a poppy, Indian hemp, or the cocoa leaf, is grown out of economic necessity by farmers who are native to a land that offers little. The ever-existent black market price tempts the registered growers to overproduce, to conceal a part of their legitimate harvest and place it on the worldwide illicit markets. Studies sponsored by the United Nations have shown that in each country there is a practical and profitable alternative to the narcotic harvest. In the region of Baalbek, Lebanon, where 90% of the land was once planted with cannabis or marijuana, now grow commercial crops that benefit rather than destroy. Nature's strange gifts, which Thomas de Quincey called the abyss of divine enjoyment, have been with us for 60 centuries. But only in the last 60 years have we released the truly lethal derivatives.